Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, good day, wherever you may be. Thanks for joining us for our first Parents Team webinar for 2024. We're really delighted to have you here with us. We're happy you've made out time from your busy schedules to join us, and we hope that we can have a very interesting conversation this evening. And I mean, a conversation that would help us to, if we haven't been involved previously in thinking about children's mental health as a serious issue, a conversation that will make us start thinking more about it, and one that would expose us to some strategies that would be effective in supporting the young people around us to be healthy, not only physically, but also mentally. So today, we're really looking at how we can nurture children's mental health. The background to this is that in 2015, Place to Be launched the Children's Mental Health Week. And the idea behind Children's Mental Health Week was really to empower, equip, and give voice to every child in the UK. But of course, children's mental health is something that is relevant for children all over the world. Since then, Children's Mental Health Week has been celebrated annually in February with various activities, very often in schools. But in Africanness, we understand that it's important to work with parents to be able to create a supportive environment for children, not only in schools, but also in the homes where they grow up. And so we thought that in light of that, the parents team should organize an event to empower parents to be able to provide a supportive environment for their children's mental health, for children to thrive. Now, this year's Mental Health Week is themed My Voice Matters. This highlights the importance of self-expression for children's mental health. And of course, we know that parents and families play a critical role in providing a safe environment for children to feel empowered, but also confident enough to find and use their voices. We also know that stifling a child's voice could adversely affect their sense of self-worth, their mental health, and indeed their development generally. Therefore, for today's session, we're really concerned with three main things. We want to delve into understanding the multiple dimensions of children's mental health. We also want to explore some of the barriers to self-expression and good mental health in children, including cultural barriers. And thirdly, we want to look into practical strategies and insights for parents to be able to support and nurture their children's mental health. I'm really delighted to be joined today by an esteemed panel, people who are professionals and experts in their own right, working on children's mental health issues and safeguarding issues as well. We have with us Agnes Wood, who is a research assistant with COMIC. We also have with us Ekanem Robertson, who is a child protection community lead with Africa. We have Stevie Golding, who is a senior manager, parents and care, Young Minds. And we have Vernon Samuels, who is a parent engagement officer with Young Minds. So Ekanem Robertson, like I mentioned, is a child protection community engagement lead with Africa. She's a dynamic advocate for positive change, particularly in empowering women globally, and she has a lot of experience in this space. She's also actively involved in philanthropy, and she's done a lot of work with Africa, where she leads the child protection community engagement team, and she imparts vital knowledge on cultural clashes, the law, and child abuse prevention. We have with us as well Vernon Samuels, who has dedicated over 3 decades of his life to working in the voluntary community, education, and training sectors. He's also committed to helping young people overcome their struggles and to thrive in life. Vernon is the Parents Engagement Officer for Young Minds. Stevie Golden is also from Young Minds, and she's the Senior Manager, Parents and Carer Services. Stevie has worked for the Parent Helpline Service, which you'll hear more about in today's conversation, over the last 6 years. And in that time, she has gained extensive experience in supporting parents, carers with their children's mental health in an advisory and safeguarding capacity. And we have Agnes Wood. Agnes is a research assistant at COMIC, and COMIC is the short for Child Orientated Mental Health Innovation Collaborative, not the comics you watch or read. And COMIC is part of the Leeds and York's NHS Trust. Agnes is currently working on 3 major study developments involving non-speaking autistic children in health and social care decisions, identifying factors contributing to eating disorder admissions, and supporting adults to change their smoking behaviors after a smoke-free inpatient stay. So Agnes has a lot of experience in research around children's mental health, young people's mental health issues, and that's what we'll hear more about in today's conversation. So thanks for being here, Agnes. Thanks for being here, Vernon, Ekanem, and Stevie. So there are 3 main things we'll be looking into today. The first bit of our conversation is going to be around understanding children's mental health and the links between children's mental health and having a voice. Sometimes in some cultures, children are to be seen and not heard. And we see that that has serious implications for the children's overall well-being and development. But before we go into all of that, let's start from the basics, understanding children's mental health. So if I were to ask you, Agnes, what exactly does that mean? When we talk about children's mental health, having a voice, what does it mean?
I think if we're going like really far back, I think mental health is fundamentally like the ability of young people and children to like express their emotions and to kind of process them and how they process that. And I think if we're looking at that in terms of like having a voice and how that can impact them, I think for my understanding, it's when young people don't have a say in terms of what affects what things we're putting in place to support them, it ultimately has a negative impact on how we're supporting them and their kind of development throughout childhood. And so I think the crux of having a voice means that we need to allow young people to have a say in policy and in safeguarding and in decisions that are ultimately going to reflect back on them to make sure that anything we're implementing is like supporting them in the best way possible.
Thank you very much for that. Stevie, what do you think, in your experience, how important or significant is children's mental health for a child's overall development?
Absolutely. So if a child experiences mental health problems, it can have a really significant impact on their life. It might impact their ability to be able to go to school and engage in a curriculum. It might impact, their ability to sort of maintain or form friendships with peers or actually continue, that socialization with them. It can also impact on like things like stuff, the hobbies, interests, things that they used to get a lot of joy and contentment from. They might withdraw from that. So again, it can spill out into all sorts of areas of life and have, really profound, impacts both in the short term and longer term. Because if it's really isolating and they're unable to engage with things like school, that could have an impact on their future prospects, how well they do in their exams, those kinds of things. So again, it's really important that we take note of that and try and get, sort of young people's mental health on the agenda and supported at the earliest opportunity.
Thanks a lot for that, Stevie. And just to mention to everyone who's listening, please feel free to use the chat function if you have any comments, suggestions. And towards the second half of the event or the session, we will also open up for questions directly from the audience. So if you want to come to the mic at that time, we'll be more than happy for you to do so. Thanks for that, Stevie. I'd like to ask you, Ekanem, what factors do you see as contributing to a child's mental health well-being from your experience of working with children and communities? You're still muted, sorry.
I didn't hear the question very well. Could you just repeat the question?
Okay, that's fine. So I was saying, what factors do you see as contributing to children's mental health and well-being based on your experience with working with children and communities?
Okay. There are many things that actually contribute to the mental well-being of a child. And it first starts for me in the home and the relationship they first have with their parents, because that actually pushes them out into the world and they start to see things through the eyes of their parents and the way that their parents navigate things with them, explain things to them, treat them. I'm going to talk from the perspective of an African home, because I'm from there and I know that very well. And there are times when I think that there are so many things that actually limit the way in which um, African children develop. It will depend very much on culture, depend on the education of their parents, will depend on the belief system fundamentally, because that belief system can tarnish the way that that child is brought up and how they see themselves. Our parents in the time that I was growing up would put education at the top of everything. They didn't talk about my feelings. They didn't talk about what I wanted to do. It was all about what they had planned for me. And a lot of it was based around me achieving the goals that they failed to achieve, or to emulate exactly what they've done. So if my parent is a doctor, they'd want me to be a doctor. There was no question as to, well, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? Do you think that it's within the kind of thing you're interested in? Oh, no, this is what you're going to do because in my family, maybe there are 4 children and each of them is allocated something. That can, tarnish the way you see yourself. That can limit how you go out into the world because you're already down from the fact that something's being demanded of you that you don't want to do. I don't know how far you want me to go, but I could talk on, but that I'll stop there for the moment.
Thank you. I think that's really key because you've touched on the role that parents play in the process as well, and how the actions or the kinds of expectations parents have on children can affect the children's mental health and well-being as well. So thanks for bringing that up. Uh, I'll go over to Vernon at this point. We've had a conversation, Vernon, where you were talking about early signs or what to look out for in young people and children in relation to raising concerns around their mental health and well-being. So I'd like to hear from you. What are the kinds of signs that we can look out for? What are the early indications so that people can begin to seek for help before things get out of hand?
Okay, thanks, Pedi. I think there are a multitude of things that we can look at, and I'll certainly touch on some of the ones that we get quite frequently within the helpline. But I think what I will start off with is that the vast majority of parents and carers know their young people, they know their children. And so the first thing I will say is when we feel that something's not quite right, there's something off about our young person, then I think it's a good place really to be prompted to maybe have some concern to do something. At Young Minds, we are very clear. We want early intervention to be something that helps young people be supported before they reach the crisis. So before they start to struggle, we want parents really to look out for those things where they think there's something not quite right, and this could be a number of things. There may be withdrawal from their friendships with some of their peers. We may also find that young people are not enjoying some of the things that they did before, so they might have had quite a lot of active involvement with um, uh, physical activities or other things as interests that they enjoy, and they've withdrawn from some of those things. They may also have mood swings, and they may also have a anxiety. One of the things that I see, I work within schools, in some of the work that I do more broadly. And one of the things that I see quite prevalent is the anxiety of a number of young people who are afraid to go through the doors of school. So we see where young people have such a concern that they are not able to function within the school system. We also see some of those situations where, as young people grow up, they are curious about who they are as young people in terms of their identity. And it may be that sometimes young people are having problems with their friendship groups where they're trying to see how they fit in, both in terms of just the kind of social friendships, but also some young people may be concerned about their sexuality and not really be clear of that. And therefore there is some anxiety or even depression that some of them experience. So there are a multitude of things, I think, that impact young people, and that parents should be mindful of. I think on the wider structural, or even I would say global scene, we all know the pandemic has hit, and we still see the after effects of the pandemic upon young people's development, where I speak to a lot of teachers in schools who are concerned at the slow development of some young people that have been affected by the pandemic. So there are a multitude of things which are either directly within the young person's environment, their home, their school, their friendships, but then there are some of the wider societal things that impact on the mental health of young people that parents should be aware of, and to then take or make some sort of response to that, to their young person.
Thanks a lot for that, Fen, and that's really helpful. So essentially, parents need to trust their instincts as well, and they need to observe their children and young people. So once there's something that just doesn't look right or out of the norm, then we need to start asking questions in a way that is supportive, not in a way that creates even more burdens on the young person or the child. Thanks a lot for that. I mean, we now have, I would say, insights into what we're dealing with when we say children's mental health, the kinds of things we're looking for, the kinds of things we're concerned about. The next thing I'd like us to talk about is around the kinds of challenges children face in relation to their mental health. And this is because we know, of course, that in the society, everyone faces one form of challenge or the other. So adults would face certain kinds of challenges in relation to mental health, but children would also face their challenges, which we need to be aware of. So I'd like to know from your own experience what those challenges could be, and I would like us to explore them also from a cultural perspective. So if I could start with Agnes again, if you don't mind.
No, yeah, of course.
What do you see as some of the unique challenges which children may face? This is in relation to expressing themselves, but also possibly in relation to other mental health issues which you deal with in the work.
I think a large thing that I come across is, I think a lot of the young people that I work with have a difficulty balancing communicating with people, like especially online, and balancing the use of like social media and how they're able to access certain information, like specifically about mental health, and how they use that information and take it and then put it back out there equally. So there's like a lot of issues with like cyberbullying or things where young people are expressing their own symptoms online, and that I think is a whole new dynamic that we're having to navigate with young people having so much access to the internet. But I think it's can also be a really strong way to communicate and access young people. Like I think the use of social media for us has been a really great way to make sure young people are getting the correct information and to make sure that they're able to like learn skills and that they're able to distribute that information as well. And I think that that's quite a unique thing that's changing like monthly or daily, and I think it's something that we're definitely having to keep on top of and update ourselves on. And I think the only way that we're able to do that as a research team is by like working with young people in the community and understanding what kind of new systems they're using. And we like every time we go to community groups and talk about technology and things like that with them, they bring up new things and new apps or new things that we don't understand and new ways that they're communicating with strangers online. And I think how we as professionals can mediate that is something that's beyond the realm, quite frankly. But I think it's definitely like a unique challenge to young people and how we can address that effectively needs to be done through like really like, I think, productive communication where there's like trust with young people, and we like can support them by ensuring that we know that they have the right resources and that they know what they should and shouldn't be accessing, whilst not restricting their, I guess, anonymity as a young person and having their ability to express themselves. But I think, like Vernon touched on as well, I think the education system and the way that's changing, I think really like a lot of young people come to me and talk about that. And I think having an understanding of how young people are having to go through these changes all the time is really important to ensure that we're implementing the right strategies to support them. But I think it's also interesting dynamic of understanding that every child's unique in their own understanding of the world, and like knowing that actually to support one child effectively probably won't replicate to another child. So it's like really identifying how we can support young people individually as well. But I think there has to be like a lot of effective communication strategies and to ensure that young people feel trusted and supported within their communities, especially within their families, to make sure that they're making the right decisions for themselves.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's interesting that you would raise the use of the internet, because clearly we see that with the internet and young people, it could be a good resource, but it could also
definitely, yeah,
a source of a threat as well, or a risk to young people, depending on how it is managed. Just on the back of that, I think 6th of February, which was 2 days ago, was Safer Internet Day. And last year we hosted a webinar, and one of the resource persons we had was Janice Richardson, who's the founder of Safe Internet Day. And some of the things she talked about was really around how do we keep young people safe online. And interestingly, some of the points she raised around keeping young people safe online, we found were also relevant to keeping young people safe offline as well.
Yeah.
And it even comes back to one of the earlier things we've talked about this evening, just observing, just being there, and just noticing when things change and taking the right steps accordingly. So thanks for raising that very important point. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to the unique challenges children face in relation to expressing themselves before we go into the second bit of the questions. Because otherwise,
sorry.
Yes.
Pedi.
No,
I was just
Stevie,
going
yes,
to,
please.
it kind of links to the second point as well. Maybe I can sort of link the both together, but I was going to say, I think every generation experiences their own challenges in terms of world events, whether that be natural disasters, war, and things like that. But I think at the moment, young people, that some of the differences with this generation of young people, and linking to Agnes's point, is our constant kind of access to information, whether that be on our social media feeds, news alerts on our phones. You know, it's really hard for young people to switch off from that and take the steps to maybe kind of mute those notifications, control their social feeds, and protect themselves when they're engaging online. And I guess, you know, things like the cost of living crisis at the moment, that's putting lots of families into financial hardship. So things like shelter, food, accommodation, having that security and safety in your family sort of life can be really challenging. And equally, you know, lots of families might not be able to afford, you know, things that could enrich or promote their young person's mental health, like after school events, extracurricular activities, or even doing, you know, family things of a weekend. So again, we see the direct impact of, you know, that crisis, and also things like the war and conflict we see in Ukraine, Gaza, Israel. Again, that has a profound impact on young people who identify with certain communities. They might have relatives or people that they know in these areas. You know, they might have lost loved ones, and actually, you know, seeing some of maybe the protests or some of the behaviours and discrimination that that certain communities face in light of these, you know, kind of events throughout the world. Again, that's really, really difficult for young people. So I definitely think not only the world events, but also kind of our exposure to them nowadays, and how much information we're fed around them can be really hard for young people and their mental health.
I mean, I can't agree more with you, point you've just raised, because I know how many times I can count, I've even lost count of how many times the news is on, the children are around and I quickly want to switch it onto something else because I'm not sure I want them being exposed to that news item in that way. But then at the same time, I'm trying to encourage them to listen to the news. So I'm struggling to find the balance there. And I think that's something that many families are facing as well, because it's either the families are really inside of it or we're being exposed to it with the headlines in the news, the newspapers, it's just everywhere. And one of the things I've also found is that sometimes children pick up on these things even when we don't know they have. I remember when there was a news item about a child who had been killed. I didn't realize that my 8-year-old had seen and heard. A few days later, she asked me about it. And it then occurred to me that she had processed this by herself without my support because I just didn't realize she had even heard the news, you know. So it's those kinds of little things that parents encounter and parents have to deal with. But I think we have to be conscious of these things, which is why we're having this conversation here today. So thanks for raising that. And then the other bit of it is around the cultural aspect. So what are the cultural challenges? So we've talked about the technology, we've talked about the news, we've talked about the events around us, both nationally and globally, and the fact that we're very often connected to people all around the world. So when things happen, it affects us either directly or indirectly. So in that light, the children are already experiencing something. Their mental health is being affected. But on top of that, there could be inhibitions to them expressing themselves. So what could those inhibitions be, especially from a cultural perspective? And I would ask Ekanem if she can shed some light on this. You're muted again, sorry.
If I could just pick up quickly on what has been said, I would describe what you've been saying, Stevie, of late, that our children are having to deal with life in real time. When we were growing up, or some of us were growing up, we got it later, or we didn't get it at all. And we were allowed to, in a sense, be children. But now there's no such thing as that. You're an adult with me. And sometimes the adults, especially, you know, in certain styles of families, will make the children become adults too. Or should I say that, like, if a child is in war zone, he's seen the same dead bodies, he's seen the rapes taking place, he's seen everything that is life, and has no means of understanding it, especially if he's been taught otherwise. Within the context of culturally, we are the expression of love is totally different, is what I can say. And I think that we as a community are having to learn how to process that better with our children. We tend to punish quite severely as well. So, I mean, I would put it under what Africa tends to teach, which is PENS: physical, emotional, neglect, and sexual. Things that happen within families that therefore compound on the child's mental state. The punishments are quite severe. In times you would say that the punishments that you're given do not go with the crime. So, you know, you could be asked to stand in what would be known as a stress position for hours, just because you did something that your parents didn't like, or you would be beaten. And I'm using the word beaten. And that would be something that would cause stress. It's like a lot of children go to school and the teacher might say something and the child would say, oh no, my parents are going to beat me. And that becomes an issue. It's not always that they are beaten. They may be smacked, but the word beat is the word that they tend to use because of a language situation. A child doesn't get the emotional warmth because the parent didn't get that. So you cannot give to your child what you do not have. It is not to say we don't have loving homes, but what we would say is love is not necessarily what another culture would say is love. You know, a culture that is interested in you studying and doing very well at school will buy you books They will not buy you a teddy bear, you know, in order to show that they care about you. They will feed you. They will give you a house. You know, if you complain that you're not loved, they say, but I have given you a house. You've got food to eat. You've got warm clothes. What more do you need? What is love than that? Whereas other cultures will say, no, you need to hug your child. You need to tell them you love them. I mean, I think there are very few Africans, or at a certain point, they would say that their parents ever sat them down and said, I love you. It comes out with difficulty. You know, it's a strange thing to do. We have issues that arise through the church's belief system. You know, if you're into witchcraft or those kind of cultural beliefs, they will impinge on the way in which you're bringing up your child. They will impinge on the way you're seeing their behavior. If I talk about the stigma of saying that your child has got mental health issues, immediately somebody will say he's mad, because that is what mental health means to the typical, you know, say African of that time. We're understanding it differently now, but he's mad. And the vision of a mad person is somebody walking in the street naked, or walking in the street delirious. However, we are now beginning to understand things that we've all gone through. I've gone through anxiety at a moment. I've gone through depression over something because you're down, but you didn't put it to depression. You didn't understand it in that detail. You know, you do have panic attacks, but all these things, nobody ever told me that they were aspects of mental health. And I guess it becomes mental health when it lasts a period of time. I know it's normally very fleeting. You know, most of us go through that. You know, something strange happens. Oh my gosh! But you know, this thing is constant. This thing limits your life, and the stigmas are great because, you know, even in some cultures, to say that your child has any issues, are they going to get married? Will we be able to improve their lives? Or, you know, what will other people say is the big thing? But I will stop there.
Thank you so much, Akanem. And I think you've raised again this really important thing around even the culture, the little things we do and the way we approach things and relationships with the children, and how this could impact on the children's mental health. And you said something that struck me. You said then and now, which is exactly that. Maybe even parenting styles needs to evolve. So the way the parents have been raised may not necessarily work the same way for children in these times, because we live in a different environment, we live in a different time. You know, I find it very interesting the differences between the millennials, the Gen Zs, the alphas or Gen As, you know, Gen alphas, they're all sorts of things. And a lot of the times when I hear it, I just laugh. But it's really key because it shows on a certain level that there's a difference in the times, in the generations, and it means something even for the way children perceive. It means something for the way we relate with children, and we can't take it for granted that what worked yesterday will work today. Then, and I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to say something on the back of what Ikanem was mentioning there, and that is there's an element for me in terms of the cultural influence on mental health for young people. On some people call it intergenerational trauma. My parents came from Jamaica, economic migrants to Britain. They're part of the Windrush generation. They experienced a lot of hostility, and for me, part of the impact on subsequent generations. You mentioned all these Gen Z and Gen X and all the rest of it. Part of it is about the anxiety of the parents or the grandparents and the real fear, because some of what they went through was physical altercations, the way that they were treated in society has made them very traumatized. And that trauma can be inadvertently, I would suggest, passed to their young people. Parents are often looked upon as the key inspiration for the youngsters. And so if the parents are traumatized by certain things, then they can then project that onto young people, I think. And then there is that challenge of young people wanting to enjoy and embrace the now. and be in the moment, versus where parents may want to be overprotective of their young person. And that, I think, can create some real tensions and some real challenges in the young person feeling able to be seen and heard and listened to, whilst also appreciating they come from a cultural background, if you like, that they somehow have to reconcile in their thinking.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Venom. Thank you. I mean, there are challenges. We see them, right? And we can't shy away from them. So I guess the next thing to consider is, what do we do about these challenges? And I'd like to encourage everyone who's here, please feel free to use the Q&A function to type in the questions that you may have. And if you have any comments, you can feel free to put them in the chat. But if you put the questions in the Q&A, it's easier for us to pick that up and put forward to the panelists. Thank you. So just about, because we know that it's not a hopeless situation, there's hope if we take on the strategies, the tools, the help that's out there for parents, some of which are presented by your organizations. So I think we can go into that discussion of what's out there. What can we do? How can parents be supported to ensure that they are enabling their children stay healthy, not just physically, but also mentally? So I guess the first question is then around practical strategies, because we like to be practical. What are some of the practical strategies which we could share with parents for them to create a supportive and nurturing environment for their children's mental health, their young people's mental health? And I also say, not only for their own children and young people, but for any other children and young people around them. What could some of these tips or strategies be? If I could ask Ekane, based on your experience in community, what are some of the things you think that parents can do to create a supportive environment for children's mental health?
I think to start with, the parents need to truly understand their children and understand the environment in which their children are living. That it is very different from when they were younger, or in fact, a lot of them are people who have come from somewhere else. There's a lot of people, Japa, now they call it, where they're leaving their place, going and in order to get a better life. But in the process of trying to get that better life, how they're bringing up their children is the way that they were brought up. And it does not necessarily bode well for what's happening in this culture. So they need to learn, they need to ask questions and establish what they can and cannot do in this country. They also need to give their children, have a relationship with your children where you can talk to them and they can talk to you. And this is where I was talking about the punishments that we sometimes give to our children, where we can even restrict that love or that care because you were naughty today, or you didn't perform well in school, or they talk down to their child, accusing them of being stupid, foolish. Those kind of things are not acceptable. And those are the kind of things that destroy a child, the morale within them and how they see themselves, because your own self-perception is what enables you to deal with your life daily. The other thing is that, you've got a child who's having issues with parents at home. When they now get into school, they're getting peer pressure, they're getting teachers on their case, and it could be purely because they are a different color, a different culture, a different complexion even. And then you're getting exclusions. That in itself causes mental illness for a lot of people, because they're being excluded for reasons that they don't always understand or are not acceptable. They're not being, I think one of the things that children are saying these days is that they're not being listened to. They're not being heard. Even when they are speaking, you're dismissing them or you're not really paying attention. And I think that in the world that we have, where it was mentioned that we've had COVID, we've had the cost of living crises. These are the things that are hankering on the minds of parents and giving them mental health issues, and the children are feeding off that because they're in the same environment, they're seeing their parents worried, or even the domestic violence or abuse that's taking place in the house can impact. I think we need to, as parents, try and establish a safe and sound environment where our children can come to us and feel free. It doesn't matter what you've done, what has happened, please come to us. Otherwise, what happens is that we're pushing our children out there, and they will go and find that information or that help in somebody else's backyard. They'll either end up in county lines and drugs matters, or they will also because of lack of communication, where we as parents are not teaching them the right things because the culture says, oh no, we don't talk about sex. Oh no, we don't talk about this. Oh no, we don't talk about that. And these are, I think, safeguarding issues that would safeguard the child, safeguard their mental state, and give them a place that they can call home. Home is supposed to be safe. And if the home is not safe, the child cannot have mental well-being.
Thanks, Akane. Before I let you go, just picking up on that last thing you said, what would you really briefly highlight as the connections between safeguarding, voice, and children's mental health?
It's the communication. It's a very important thing, because if you don't allow your children to be able to express themselves, they cannot tell you what's happening to their lives. Very often when we break something or something is broken, we want to fix it, which could mean just, slapping some glue down the middle. Whether it's the right glue or it's not the wrong glue, as long as it sticks together, oh, it's mended now. No. In the case of children, you need to show that you can feel what they're feeling, you can understand it, and meet them at that point of need so that you can begin to deal with it. It's really that thing of ensuring that you have got to the bottom of the situation. In order to, because if you're not doing that, they will run into places that are unsafe for them. So home has to be safe first. So safeguard your child in the house, and you'll begin to safeguard them outside of the house. Because there's enough things out there that are dangerous or, need safeguarding against. You don't need to give them more, but you need to give them somewhere they can come to for assistance and help. The right place, which is you.
Thank you so much for that. It reminds me of a friend of mine who should say to her children, the issue isn't getting into trouble, but the issue very often is when you try to cover up the trouble that has happened. So whenever you're in trouble, just come home. Yeah. Let me know, and we can walk through it together. It doesn't matter how terrible you think it might be. Just come home and let us talk through it and find a solution together. And very often you find that works, because young people get into trouble trying to help themselves, and it just compounds the problem, and by the time parents find out, it's too late. So I think one of the things we have to ask ourselves as parents is, how do we ensure that the children trust us enough to come home and say, this is what has happened. I have made a mistake. I have gotten into trouble, or something's happened. How can they feel safe enough to have that conversation? Because if we're able to get that, then the problems have solved. And this links in really nicely with the issue of voice. Yes, Akane.
I was going to jump in there and say that one of the things I would often say to parents is that if you are wrong, admit it. Say to your child, oh my goodness, I didn't understand that. I'm so sorry. Because we expect our children to say sorry to us if they do something wrong. And I remember what a parent saying, that her child said to her one day, "Why should I say sorry to you, mommy? You never say sorry." And so that tells you that your child is mirroring. Your child sees more than you think that they see. I think we look at them as little people and, oh, she's only 5. What can she see? What does she understand? But she understands far more than you sometimes give her credit for. They feel your pain. They see everything. That, I mean, it's like a child in its mother's womb. If the mother smokes, the child smokes. If the mother eats what she shouldn't eat, the child is eating it too. And I think that when the child comes out of the womb, it's no different. You see parents, if the mother is fit, the child is fit. If the mother is obese, the child is obese. It flows. And so we need to know that we need to pay attention to our children and deal with that building of trust. I think nobody's mentioned that yet, but that trust is where that child can say, well, I'm a bit broken today. I didn't do this right today, but mommy, this is what happened. And then the parent needs to support. I mean, you don't have to say, you stupid child, why did you do that? You say, okay, so why did you do that? How did that happen? And then you work it through. So the child doesn't feel, denigrated and shocked by the whole thing, but feels that supported into the new position that you want them to be in so that they can correct their actions.
Thank you so much for that, Ekanem. I also remember one of the common styles of parenting used to be that daddy was the tough one and mommy was the soft one. Yeah. So if a child did something wrong, I can see Venom. If a child did something wrong, mom will say, oh, wait, just wait. And when dad comes, you get it. Yeah. But perhaps that's not something we should be doing, right? Maybe we want to do it differently so that both mom and dad are able to build this relationship with the child. And the child feels free to speak to any one of them who's available, because otherwise we might run into a situation where the child is with maybe the tougher one and then doesn't speak up. And so we're in the same problem. But we want to create a conducive environment for the child to speak freely, with anyone who's around, knowing that they're safe with that person. Vernon.
Yeah, just to say on back of what's been said, I think it's all really, really interesting and really good stuff. I think there's also something about self-care for parents, because if a parent is not in a good place, it can be really difficult to support your child. And I think that part of the effectiveness of supportive parents is that they themselves are caring for themselves, supporting themselves. So, for example, I think it's really important that a number of people have said already that now is not the same as it was 10 years, 20, 30 years ago. I think it's really important that parents equip themselves with information. So we talk about having conversations with a young person. How does that happen? There may be a real awkwardness where a parent might have the desire to speak to their young person and reassure the young person that they're there. But if they have not got knowledge and techniques around perhaps how to open conversations, how to have conversations, those conversations never happen. And there's it kind of said these young people will then go elsewhere to try and find those answers and to get those and feel that they are seen and heard. So I think part of the way of parents being effective in supporting their young person is to get knowledge. So for example, it's not just a plug for Young Minds, but we have a website at Young Minds where last year we had some 1.4 million visits to the parent page on the website. And on the parent page, there is a multitude of information about some of the issues that parents can, or some of the approaches that parents can take to looking at particular issues that their young people have. One of which is about having a conversation with your young person. There's a great saying that says, if the only tool you have is a hammer, you see every problem as a nail. And I think sometimes our parents have to recognize there are more tools in the toolbox when it comes to support, and they need to equip themselves with those tools just so they can be more effective in that pretty tough role as a parent.
Thank
But
you
I
so
just,
much for that. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. It's just something you said there that triggered me, and also partly what you said, Pedi, which is that, wait till your father gets home, and then puts that father in that position that he's the hated one, for always being the one that punishes in those times. We also talked just now about um, children going outside to get the love or care or information that they need. I like to point out as well that within the African context, we sometimes send our children to a particular aunt or uncle. They will put you right ahead, they will talk to you, kind of attitude. And that endangers the child sometimes, because it could be that very person who they need to be actually safeguarded against, because that person can actually be a predator to your child. So you must be very careful of that. That is why all the more reason you should do that care yourself.
Thank you so much for that, Ekane. So we can't outsource it, right? Parents
No.
need to do it themselves. Yeah. And of course, parents will be supported through the process. So you're not alone as a parent. And really, Vernon, you've mentioned self-care. That's the next webinar we'll be having, because we recognize that, like you've mentioned, you can't give what you don't have. And parents need to be in a good state themselves to be able to support the children. So later this month, we will have a webinar on self-care for parents, and we will put in the details towards the end of today's session. So thanks for raising that already. Wow. We've really covered a lot, and we've got some questions coming in. Thanks to everyone who's been here. Please feel free to keep sending the questions through the Q&A. We'll present them to the panelists as well. So now let's talk about, more about the parental support strategies that are out there. If I could ask you, Agnes, what do you see as some of the effective communication strategies with children about mental health? Because a lot has been said about the need for open conversation, talk to the children, not just talk down, but discuss with them, have an open conversation. So what are some of the strategies for having the conversation in an effective way to support children's mental health?
Yeah, definitely. I don't want to, I think I'll probably replicate a lot of what's already been said, because I do think they overlap a lot. But I think a large thing that I come across is a lot of young people feel like they don't have time to process a lot of things, especially like young people who are like neurodiverse. A lot of the young people that I work with are neurodiverse, and they feel like it takes them longer to process information or to understand where they've gone wrong or where somebody else has gone wrong and they've responded incorrectly. And I think giving young people that space and time to understand your perspective and also understand the world in general, I think is really important to allow them to make mistakes. And like it's already been said, then recognize that actually maybe it wasn't deliberate, maybe they have made a mistake, but we have to respond to that positively and give them the space and time to actually come to us and be like, that's okay, you've done that wrong, but we can like work through that together. And I think there's something really strong to be said about like using like the community around you and using like the support systems that might already be in place, and like relying on those who can help you in terms of like community groups or those around you that might have a better understanding of like a mental health condition that's going on. I know a lot of the young people that I work with find loads of support in local community youth groups, and they come for advice and support. And I think being able to like utilize those support groups that are already there is like a really important way to have, not only to give the person you work with or your child like time to process information, but it also gives them kind of a new perspective as well. If they're talking to other people before they come to you or after they've come to you, it's a really good way to ensure that they're getting like lots of different pieces of information to allow them to better understand what's going on around them and why things might have turned out the way that they did. So I think giving young people space and time to process information effectively is a really good way to ensure that you're not pressuring them to either respond a certain way, or you're not responding too quickly either, because I think it's quite easy to kind of bite back a bit too fast. So I think giving them time and giving yourself time as well is really important.
Thank you for that, Agnes. And I think it's really important, the point you've raised. Just listening to you, it reminded me of something, the fact that every child is different. So the fact that one child gets it the first time you said it doesn't mean the next child will get it the first time you say it. And then the fact that one method you used worked with the first child doesn't mean it will work with the second and the third. So we need to be mindful of those differences. And there is help out there. Again, in March, we will have a webinar on neurodiversity. And that's something parents need to be aware of, because children are different and that is valid. It's not their fault, it is who they are. So we need to understand who every child is and work with them accordingly, because otherwise we end up using, Venom talked about having the hammer and then every problem becomes a nail. So it'll be very similar. If you didn't understand a child, you will be giving them the wrong things and then they can't work. So for instance, imagine if, it's been snowing, right? Imagine if someone were to come and is giving me a sundress to wear. It just won't work because this is not the time and place for it. But hopefully in July, maybe it will work then. So it's really about understanding the children and ensuring that we provide them with the right tools to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, as parents, educating ourselves. And like Agnes, you've said, taking advantage of the community support that's out there, but not outsourcing the responsibility to some, still being part of that process.
Yeah. And I think, like it's already been said, I think it's also really important to ask questions and to better understand from a parent's perspective, to understand where the child's coming from, especially when it's very easy to jump to conclusions from either side. And I think it's really important that if you can have that conversation and that trust with that young person, just being able to ask questions to better understand why they're upset or why they're angry or why they've done a certain behavior. It's a much easier way to, avoid the conflicts that might happen otherwise.
Thank you so much for that. I'd like to ask you, Stevie, what are some of the resources and tools for parents to identify and respond to children's mental health needs? And maybe you could talk to us about the parent helpline as well within that context.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think largely the work we do with parents and carers on the helpline, we offer different support channels, and we're really there to listen to parents' concerns, because often they tell us that they're being shut down, they're not being heard, they're not being believed, by other people or professionals. So again, we really try to mirror what we've already been talking about in those, holding those really safe conversations about that non-judgmental listening ear, really giving space and time to hear what their concerns are from their point of view. As Vernon I think mentioned earlier, they are experts in their child, so we take time to hear about their concerns, and then we try to kind of contextualize through a lot of reflection, summary, about what we've understood from that conversation, and make sure that we're on the right tracks before we start giving more tailored advice and guidance. And we like to give practical techniques that families can do at home. We can also give families a steer on what support is out there, maybe locally or through sort of maybe other statutory agencies like the GP, local mental health teams, early help services, those kinds of things. And also just give a lot of emotional support, because often parents and carers are doing so much to support their child, often at the expense of their own sort of well-being. So again, just trying to pick out the positives of what's happening in that in that situation, and really trying to build and strengthen those even in what feels quite difficult times. It's really important for the child's kind of own resilience as well, to celebrate those, even if they're little things that are going well, or they're doing well. So yeah, and we can also signpost to lots of other agencies sort of in the field. There's lots of charities and organisations that specialise in different areas of young people, their mental health, from anxiety to autism, to eating disorders, whatever that might look like. So it's really just trying to not only look at what the parent can do in a practical sense themselves at home, but also making them aware of the support systems that are around them. So that's what we do on the service.
Thank you so much. So if a parent has concerns, if you notice some changes, if you feel that something not right, is it okay for the parents to go to Young Minds websites, pick up the phone and call the number of the parent helpline then?
Yes, absolutely. And we, I think sometimes parents feel like, oh, I don't know if it's bad enough to give a call. I don't know if I should be worried. Or so again, we talk to people that are kind of really at the early stages, just wondering, oh, is something not quite right? I'd like a second opinion. Or, what, I have noticed a few things, right through to, parents who are unfortunately supporting young people who need more urgent care, or they've reached crisis point because they've not received the support they've needed. So no matter what the questions are, whether they feel big or small, we are here to support parents in the best way we can, and that can be through our telephone, web chat, email, website. We're absolutely free to call, and we can also provide different accessibility tools, because we know actually that can sometimes be a barrier for parents. So we offer translation services, so that we can provide different languages, but also things like text type and web chat for those who might have sort of hearing impairments and things like that. So again, just trying to remove some of those barriers in reaching us too.
Thank you so much. And just in the chat box, we've put in the web link to the Young Minds Parents Helpline. So everyone could please take note of that if you want to explore and see what the Young Minds Parents Helpline has to offer. It doesn't have to be used today. It doesn't have to be used now, but I think it's useful to know what's out there, and just perhaps even to refer someone who might be in need of that support. So thanks a lot for that. And to mention that it's free as well. So it's a free service, freely available, and it's something that will be useful for at least the first step, even when we're not sure whether we need help or not. It's good to have that conversation from someone who's an expert and who can then reassure us or signpost us to get more help or support as needed. We've got 2 questions in the Q&A. I'll start with the first one. So what I'll do is I'll read it out live, and then anyone who feels inclined to amongst the panelists can feel free to come to the mic and answer the question. So thanks a lot for the questions. The first one is from Erekpitano Kupon. Thank you. Could the speakers also shed more light on the impact of electronic gadgets on children's mental health? Will the reading culture, physical books, help kids more than electronic gadgets would?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
If I can just say a couple of things there, I think, in terms of the impacts of those gadgets, and then on the reading thing. I think we've covered a fair few things around the impact. With the mobile phone, the impact of these gadgets really know very few limits. So when a child goes around, they carry their phone with them. So things like the cyberbullying and all the rest that we've talked about is something that we need to take on board. But also just the accessibility of phones. I believe that young people need boundaries, and one of those conversations I believe that should be had. I mean, I have children. My children are grown. My youngest is 23. But one of those boundaries that you should have is around the use of this device that can so easily influence their thinking and their values, etc., etc. And it is all pervasive in that they take it to bed with them. So there are some young people who are exhausted in the morning because they're on their phone, in a limitless way, consuming all sorts of things. So I think there is a conversation to be had around what is a reasonable boundary, and it is about listening both ways. So rather than the parents saying, no phones, you come into our home, there's no phones, there is a need, I think, for a conversation where parents are seeking to understand their young people, but equally there needs to be some understanding that whilst the mobile phone is almost intoxicating, and whilst there is I think a hunger, a desire to consume more and more, I think that without boundaries and limits, it can really take over the lives of young people. So I think there's something really important about that conversation that needs to be had. And I think it needs to be an informed conversation. Otherwise, I think there's a danger that the parent will react rather than respond appropriately. And so preparing for that conversation, I think, is really important so that you can both hear, but also lay out the case for why it's important to have some boundaries around that. In terms of the second part of the point that the person in the chat put around physical books, I think the reality, and I think it's one of those positives about technology, we can consume information in multi-forms. So, for example, I consume a lot of my reading via audiobook. So audio and the right types of video consumption can actually be very enriching in terms of the learning process. So I would say young people shouldn't just be limited to hardcover books per se, but we should actually be trying to encourage them to consume credible source information from credible sources, and that can be informed by both parents but also peers and other responsible professionals who have an awareness there of some of the things that they can consume to be more knowledgeable about the things that are in a balanced way.
Thank you so much for that. I think it again raises this issue of taking advantage of the good, but also putting in boundaries to ensure that it's not excessive and the risks are minimized. So thanks for raising that. And I should also say, when we had that webinar on keeping children safe online, one of the points that Janice made was around boundaries. So it's something that keeps coming through. So children need boundaries. She was very clear on that. She said children need boundaries. Young people need boundaries. So even today, we're talking about mental health. And again, it's coming up. So clearly, parents need to understand what the boundaries should be and set them in a way that is positive, reinforcing, but doesn't create other problems, but clearly we need boundaries around children. And it reminds me of when people say you have to be the adult. So the parents need to be the adults in the room, but they need to be the adults in a way that is supportive of the children as well. So thanks a lot for that. Agnes, you were going to say something.
Hi, sorry about that, Vernon. Didn't mean to cut you off at the beginning. I was going to say pretty much exactly the same. I think in terms of whether children should have access to it and how we control that, I think it's again, about that trust, and it's about whether, I don't think it's necessarily about whether children should always have access to technology or phones. It's about having that space so that if something goes wrong, or if they are accessing something, they feel like they can come to you and they feel like they can be like, this has happened, or should I be looking at this, should I not? And having that space and that trust to make sure that if they know that they can come to you and say that they've messed up or something's happened, means that actually it should limit how far things go. And I think, like Verna said, I think there's so many positives to technology as well, and I think so many aspects of it in terms of connecting with others and connecting with the right information. And I think that side of it can be really strong and really positive. And I think, we shouldn't take away from the potential aspects of technology that can be negative when there's a lot of strong facets of it as well.
Thank you so much for that, Ekanem. You're muted, Ekanem.
Oh, I'm so sorry. It's very interesting to listen to this with regard to the phone, as if the phone is a new thing, or technology is a new thing. In my day, the great technology was TV. And so we were TV children. We were brought up by the TV. So if you were a nuisance to your parents, go and watch TV. Go and watch TV. So we were plonked in front of it, and it did all our training right there. Now the thing you see parents do is that they will take the phone. With all their settings on it, they give their child their phone from the age of about 2 to 5, and they're there playing with it, forgetting sometimes to change their settings when handing it to the child. So they may see things that they shouldn't see. And so what I'm also adding to this is, do as you expect your children to do. So if you don't want them living on the phone and on the internet, you shouldn't live on it either. I have been driving along to work and seeing a mother, phone like this, walking, pushing a trolley, and the children are scattered around her like chicken, running all over the place. She doesn't know if they're crossing the road or not. She just assumes that they're following her, but this is what she's doing. The child learns that. That's the norm. That's acceptable. It's not acceptable. So if you want your child to do something, do it yourself. And then it actually means that you have to parent. You have to be present. You have to be there. You have to be inventive. Children are growing. Their minds are expanding. They want to learn something new every 10 seconds. Do it, or do as much of it as you can. Find different things to organize themselves. We're watching cooking on their iPads. Do the cooking in the kitchen. Do a meal from scratch. Create something. You're almost like a teacher in your own house. Apart from what you expect a teacher to do at school, you do something in the house. It's your job. You cannot abrogate that to anybody, and certainly not to a machine and not to AI to do it for you. Because you can't then, 20 years later or 10 years later, say, this is not the child I brought up. I don't know this child. This is not what I wanted. Where were you? You may have been present, but were you present in the upbringing of that child? What input did you put in? You can only get out what you put in. And so I shall stop there.
No, but thank you so much. It kind of really profound. Thank you. So the second question we have is from Paula. Thank you, Paula, for the question. I wonder about parents who are also experiencing mental health issues and may not know how to address it. How can they help their children or know what to look out for? So how about parents who may not know that they themselves are experiencing mental health issues? And I think this links up with what Ekanem you had mentioned earlier. So how can those parents get help? How can they know what to do to support their children as well?
The only thing I can suggest here is if you don't know that you have something, you wouldn't know to go and get it. I think that it's really where friends and family around you can see that you're not either coping or something is going wrong, and they can gently usher you to a situation that you would get some care or talk you into it. Everybody has a friend. Everybody has somebody that cares a little bit more about you than they do of themselves. And so they can help you out. And I mean, we are all here. Think about your friends. Who do you know that you've sometimes wondered, is that person really all right? I mean, that's that part of this mindfulness that you talk about and this self-care. Care about the people in your little 10-friend group or 5-friend group, and ask yourself today, have I missed something? Because one of the subjects we haven't actually mentioned, and I don't know if it's taboo to bring it up here, but it's still in the mental health category, and that is suicide. That has gone up in children. I'm sure Stevie and Vernon, you're in Young Minds, so you see it happening. You hear it on the phones happening. And perhaps you could make a slight comment about that. But that is another issue. And sometimes it comes out of what's happening in the home. Sometimes it comes out of their identity, their color, their whether, LGBTQ, things like this, confusion in those categories. But, the question was about parents. We should care for parents as well, because that will impact what's happening to your child. Because say, for example, I'm a parent and I have a friend who has children now. Our children are interacting. Maybe sometimes I leave my child with that parent. What's going to happen? Do you understand? So you need to. It's a wider thing than this, in my view.
Thank you, Ekanem. And I think Ekanem's just given us a call to action for everybody. Who's that friend you have? Who's that friend who's acting a bit differently? And maybe rather than avoid the friend, keep away and say, you know what's too much drama there. I'll just walk away. Maybe we have that sense of, or we have that responsibility. We owe the responsibility to that friend. Maybe for whatever is what, we've had good times with the person in the past. So even if just for the memories of the good times we've shared, we should have that sense of responsibility to check in with them, make sure they're all right. Because a lot of the times, people may not know that they have changed. We may not know when we have changed. It's those who work with us, it's those who hear us, it's those who see us who would say, actually, there's something different about Pedi today. So let's be our brothers and sisters keepers, and let's look out for the next person, because we never know really. If our friends are well, our family members are well, then we've got a bigger support system, isn't it? But if there's something wrong with our friends and family, our network becomes smaller and smaller. Our support system becomes smaller and smaller. Venom.
Yes, in terms of the self-care for parents, I think there's a couple of things that I mentioned on the back of what's already been said. One of which is that we all, as individuals trying to navigate through life and support as parents our children, we all need a level of self-awareness. And if people don't know where to start, again, on our website, on our parents section, there is a section about parents self-care. And so if people are not perhaps clear on where they can start to review their level of self-care, I think it's a great starting point. And I think that's important that we have the level of awareness about ourselves to see if we have any needs that are there that we're struggling while we're trying to help a struggling young person. So that's really important, I would say. And also in regards to parents and self-care, I think there's probably two other things I would mention. One of the things that I love about Young Minds is that we look to try and gather insights from parents and professionals, people who are either struggling or have had one of those small wins or a big win, where that can be shared. And there's nothing like being able to share an insight of somebody who's had the lived experience, not just a theoretical book, but actually where people have had experiences and they have dealt with situations, they have come through it, they've reflected on what they have gained and learned from that for the benefit of wider people. So again, I think it's really important for people to seek insights where they can. There are a number of biographical books where you have some authors who are very self-aware and some of the struggles that they have gone through, which I think are very insightful, I think, for parents to appreciate some of the tensions and some of the trauma and the trials that young people are trying to navigate. And I guess what the underlying thing I'm trying to convey here is about increasing your understanding and your knowledge base really of yourself and some of the situations that you might be presented with, that you have options open before you in terms of the next steps that you were going to take in terms of trying to move to a better place. So that's really important, I think, in terms of parents, that they recognize where there are insights that they can gain that will empower them and help them to feel confident about some of the responses that could be perhaps a bit more appropriate than the initial reaction that they might make in response to a situation where something's not quite right with a young person.
Thank you so much for that, Vernon. And it's really great that yourself and Stevie have offered more insights into what Young Minds does. And I'm hoping that parents have keyed into that. We've also put in the chat box a link to the Parents Helpline. I would like to invite Ekanem as well as Agnes to also tell us very briefly what your organization does and what parents can come to you for in terms of support as part of our closing for today's session. Ekanem?
Okay. All right. I belong to an organization called Africa Safeguarding Children. We started out many years ago, about 23 years ago, following the Victoria Climbié situation, where she was unfortunately killed by her aunt and the partner, based around beliefs and also the departments of the social care, not left hand not really talking to right hand. And so our CEO, Debbie Rio, looked into the reasons for this happening. And what she found was that although we as a community represented 4% of the nation, 7% of our children were going into care. Why was this? And she realized that a lot of people are coming back then with their suitcases and their culture and just, taking root and just living as they live back home, so to speak. Whereas things have changed here. So we started this organization in order to educate and to make things more understandable for migrants coming into this country. So we looked at the reasons for children going into care, and the highest reason was abuse. And the abuse fell into the categories I've mentioned earlier, which is physical, emotional, neglect, and sexual issues that arise. And these things can arise very simply. With the physical, it was hitting the children. That was your instant reaction, and it's what we were talking about earlier on. It's part of that trauma. You were hit a long time ago, you do the hitting as well. And it's really to realize that there are other ways of bringing up a child than to beat the child into beat the sense into the child. There's talking now. There's understanding. Very often you were just beaten. Sometimes you didn't even know why. And nobody would explain to you because you're the child, I'm the adult, and I am right and you are wrong kind of perception. Of course, emotionally, we've been talking about this. This is leading to a lot of mental health issues. And we are now the parents. And we have unfixed traumas, all these things that we went through, which we haven't even worked through. Sometimes we've just buried it deep down, and maybe something has happened and it can trigger up. And often when we do our sessions, people remember things. I mean, sometimes people remember that they were sexually abused when they were younger, but they hadn't realized it. They hadn't been able to put words to it, and they couldn't talk to anybody about it. And these are the things that we need to understand about our children, that they are actually living life real time in their time. And we need to be able to tap into that because they can come to us. If they don't come, it's so important. If they don't come to you, they will go elsewhere. I give you a very silly example. I have never been taught the facts of life. I think you all know what that is. I've never been taught it. My parents didn't tell me, so therefore I don't know. However, I do know. Why do I know? Because the children at school who were allowed to attend those lessons told me. So do you want another child telling me something that is so important to my existence and getting it wrong because they're almost giving me a bad photocopy of what they, child's eye view of it? Or do you want to tell me the right thing so I don't make mistakes in future? We need to stand in the gap for our children. We need to stand in front of them in every way. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Ekanem. Agnes, if you tell us what COMIC does as well and how parents can key into your services.
So COMIC is a young people's mental health research team, and a big part of what we do is co-production, and through that we've set up a young people's advisory network, and it's a collection of like community groups and young people, like individuals across Yorkshire who advise on the work that we're doing, and we co-produce all of our research projects from beginning to end. And we want to make sure that all of the work that we're doing is going into the right communities and is applicable to what's actually going on in real life. And we're a big advocate for not doing research just for the sake of doing research. And we want to make sure that when we're writing policy change and when we found something, we want to make sure it's going to the right places and going to the correct policymakers, and through that we want to connect with the right communities. So really, if you want to either not necessarily take part but advise on any of your own lived experience to make sure that we're actually doing the work that needs to be done, that's how you can like help us and support the work that we're doing, because we really want to make sure that we're running the right research for the right reasons and for the right people as well.
Thank you so much for that, Agnes. And just on the back of that, to mention that at AfriKindness, we have the research team, we have the parents team, and we also have the schools or education team, as well as the children's team. Now, these different teams work together really closely with the organizations that we have here with us today. And thanks for being here, all of you. For the parents team, next month in March, we're going to be having the webinar on neurodiversity, like I mentioned. And that webinar builds on research that has been conducted by members of that team. The idea really is that we want to get the right data. We want to ensure that whatever we say is evidence-backed. And so we're able to provide solutions that are more effective for the parents who need them, but also for the children and young persons who need them. Having said that, I mentioned earlier that we're having a self-care webinar later this month. That webinar is really focused on parents. The idea is we want parents to be in the best position to provide the support that the children need. This webinar comes up on the 27th of February. And on the screen, you can see the QR code that leads to the Eventbrite page where you get more information about the webinar. We hope to see all of you there and come along with someone, because today we've talked about the importance of being there for someone else. So don't come alone, come along with someone who would benefit from self-care. And the truth about it is we all need it. Whether you're a parent or not, we all need self-care. We'll be talking about things like burnout. We'll be talking about positivity, mindfulness. We all need that. So feel free to bring along someone else who will benefit from the session as much as you will do. The other thing I want to mention is that we have the parent resource page. And on the parent resource page, we have lots of details around our past events, but also forthcoming events. So for instance, the session I mentioned on online safety for children, all of the information is uploaded there. The recordings we had with the different panelists, including Janice Richardson, you can find on that page, and lots of resources about how to keep children safe online. We've also had a session with Africa on safeguarding for children. Again, that is available online through the parent resource page. Today's recording will also be uploaded in due course, and whatever resources we get from all the organizations we have with us today will be uploaded there as well. I know, for instance, that Young Minds is doing a recording for us where they'll explain a bit more about the Parents Helpline. So that will be uploaded to that page as well. So please engage with the Parents Resource page. And if you have any information which you think is useful and would benefit other parents, please feel free to send that across to us. And we'll be more than happy to upload. The final thing I'll mention is our Parents Web app. This is an app where it's a virtual community for parents. So just as we have parents joining the webinar sessions and all, we think it's important to have a steady community where we can create groups of parents to engage with other parents and get the support that they need. So again, we will invite you, if you're interested in being part of that community, to get in touch with us, and we'll share with you the details for joining. And it's really useful because we have trainings coming up for parents and lots of other opportunities for empowerment, for support, and we would want to share those with you as well. So please stay in touch with us, follow us on our social media pages, and let's do this together, because parenting is a full-time job. And I know most parents already have full-time jobs. So we want to provide all of us with the support that's needed to ensure that we be our best selves and we give the best we can to the parents and young children around us. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to having you again at our next session. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Really, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are, and stay safe, stay well. Thank you.